Hi, I'm Adam, and I just want to talk about what the 90s and early 2000s were like, at least from what I remember, as now I'm an adult. And I remember a little bit of it. You know, as a kid, I just remember the 90s. There was a lot less technology back then than there is now. Of course, you had recording devices and stuff, but you had there were big cameras. And there's like cameras everywhere now. Back then, it was still kind of rare for cameras to be a lot of places, unless you wanted to, you didn't have where you go into a Walmart and them constantly recording you, like they do today. People had those, but it was rare. What I also remember is in the late 90s, they had Y2K, the Y2K scare. Everyone was afraid that the world was going to end, and then nothing happened. Another thing I remember about the late 90s, early 2000s is there was no social media that you could think of. There was blog sites, but there was no MySpace or anything like that until like 2003 is when MySpace came out. And really, people didn't start using it until like 2004 or 5 or whatever. So like the early 2000s, it was like the only way you could like communicate online was through email or through AOL. And that's what I remember is AOL. And I remember the internet being really, really slow. Like our internet today is like hundreds of times faster than it was back then, and you had to wait forever for it to load up. It would like have like these dialing sounds and stuff. I also remember the time, and this was that long ago, back when GPSs were not that great. I remember having to use MapQuest and MapQuest and like regular maps just to drive around back in like 2005, 6, and 7, like all the way up until like 2010, like 9 or 10 is when GPSs started getting pretty good. But before then, GPSs were always messing up and always giving you the wrong directions, typically. So it was just better just to use MapQuest or a regular map. And you would just actually print out the directions. Another thing that I remember is when the iPod came out, and you still had tape players on your car, and you would actually stick a tape in your car that would have a auxiliary cord in it, so that you can hook into your iPod and play your music through your car. That's what I remember, because there was no Spotify, none of that stuff back then. I think there was Pandora, but it was only like on your computer. There was no like apps back then, pretty much. I remember Napster being really big. I remember people downloading music illegally, that on Napster and LimeWire. I remember the internet looking a lot different. I remember it just being like it was very, very colorful back then compared to now. Like back then, there was all these colors, and there was all these, you would click on a website and they would have like these goofy kind of, JPEGs or something, or Flash. You would have like Flash games and stuff. I remember E-Bombs World being like that. Like everything was like very colorful, very playful. On MySpace, you could like make your own background on your profile. You could have your own music. Of course, you had to add HTML and stuff like that in there, and PHP. And Facebook is just very boring and bland compared to what MySpace was, in my opinion. MySpace was just so much fun. You could spend hours on MySpace just customizing your page and building your profile and building your top like 10 friends or whatever. You didn't have that with Facebook, and I'm wondering why Facebook got so popular when it's so bare bones and so boring. Like the internet now is just like so boring compared to how the internet was back in the early 2000s through, I would say, I don't know, 2010 or 2011 is when it started becoming more boring. I just remember the internet being a lot more fun, and there were a lot more Flash games and stuff like that. Of course, Flash doesn't really exist anymore. But if you remember that, let me know. I also remember when DVDs became like really popular. Because I remember like using VHS for the longest time, and then all of a sudden it was like this thing that looked really cool, and it was like a disc. And I remember it was about like 2002 when I went to a Blockbuster and they started renting out DVDs, and I was like, oh man, I want to try this. And then I also remember, probably, if it wasn't too long after that, probably about 4 or 5 years after that, that Blu-rays came out in 2007 or something. And I remember going into a store and seeing Spider-Man 3 or something, like a Best Buy, and seeing Spider-Man 3 being on a demo, and it was like, oh my god, this looks three-dimensional. So I just remember technology being like really starting to get really advanced, like when the iPhone came out in 2007. And I remember all the rich kids in my school owned it. So everything just came about like really fast. Like after about 2007, everything just came by fast. Like the iPhone, all these apps and stuff. And then when people started adapting the iPhones and smartphones, like about 6 or 7 years later, that's when things really started to change. But to me, honestly, like the internet is very bland now. YouTube is bland. Facebook is bland. Instagram is bland. It's not really interactive like how I remember the internet being like when I was younger. When I was a kid, you could actually play these games on every single profile, and you can customize your own web page on MySpace. Of course, you can do that with WordPress now, or But it's like MySpace was free, and it was basically like your own WordPress or Squarespace or something. So that's what I remember things being like. And I just remember you didn't have access to constant news on your phone. So now people are, like, the whole Iraq war and stuff was going on, but like you didn't really hear about it too much because it was on the news. But if you didn't pay attention to the news, it was never on your phone. Like, you never got constant updates on your phone. It was just like, oh yeah, CNN said that Saddam Hussein was taken down or whatever. So like the Israel versus Palestine thing, if that were going on back then, people just didn't really pay attention to, whereas now it's on people's phone, constant, 24/7. And that's what I remember. That's what is, I think the issue with today is people are on social media all the time. So that's what I remember it being like. And as someone who is like 34 years old, I've just seen so much technology change rapidly. And now we got AI. And I think within the next, knowing how technology is, I think within the next 10 to 15 years, this AI is going to take about 40% of people's jobs in every single sector of technology. I think a lot of people are going to go the way of Blockbuster. And yeah, that's what I think is going to happen with AI. So just be prepared.